Who cut the internet mid-sentence during a federal cybersecurity briefing? That was the question that sent shockwaves through the Zoom room just as my screen froze on the most crucial slide of my presentation. All I could do was sit in my home office, blinking at the spinning buffer icon like it held the secrets of the universe, while 12 government officials, including one from Homeland Security, glared into silence from frozen frames. As my phone exploded with texts asking what the hell happened, I bolted out the front door to find Karen from the HOA smirking beside a backhoe, casually sipping an iced latte while one of her goons rolled up the severed fiber optic cable like it was garden hose. "We don't allow unapproved utility lines," she said, as if she hadn't just torpedoed a six-figure federal contract and ignited the pettiest tech war this neighborhood would ever see. It wasn't just a dropped call. It was a financial wrecking ball. That meeting was supposed to finalize my company's emergency communications deployment protocol. We were pitching to coordinate nationwide mobile towers in disaster zones. I'd worked on the architecture for over 6 months. When the feed went dead, I watched my career prospects unravel like a loose thread from a cheap sweater. I didn't panic. I took screenshots of the outage report, time-stamped everything, and marched straight to the property's utility trench where the real chaos began. The cable had been cleanly sliced and yanked out with what looked like surgical precision. I knelt down and stared at the mangled mess, my brain trying to process how this happened when my line was legally approved by the city and installed underground with a permit. That's when Karen strutted over with her sunglasses perched like a crown of judgment. She waved a paper at my face, the FOA's amended bylaws. "We've updated our rules. All non-community approved installations are subject to removal. Visual clutter and underground lines disturb the harmony of our aesthetics." I stared at her. My line wasn't visible. It ran 6 feet underground, buried during construction, flagged and marked according to city code. But Karen wasn't concerned about facts. She was concerned about power. Control. The ability to make someone like me, quiet, techie, not prone to drama, feel small. "But this is a private connection," I protested, trying to keep my voice level. "It's not even visible to the neighborhood." "Doesn't matter," she said flatly. HOA voted. It's a safety concern now. I looked around. Nobody else was involved, just Karen and her 2 favorite lackeys from the board, both looking like they hadn't read a single legal document in their lives. The whole thing was orchestrated behind closed doors. No notices. No warning. No community discussion. They treated my lifeline like it was just another branch to prune. I knew then this wasn't just about my cable. Karen had been on a rampage for weeks, enforcing every little HOA clause with increasing intensity. One of my neighbors got fined for having unsanctioned solar panels. Another was cited because her porch lights weren't HOA warm white. This was about domination, and in my case, it was personal. You see, I wasn't just some guy who liked tech. I was a network architect who specialized in rapid deployment telecom solutions. I built signal infrastructures for field hospitals, disaster shelters, even military-grade operations. When hurricanes knocked out entire grid sectors, it was me and my team they called to restore communications. Karen had no idea that she hadn't just messed with someone who depended on internet. She declared war on someone who built it. That night I didn't stew. I didn't rant on Nextdoor. I got to work. I pulled up the specs on my laptop, using mobile tethering, of course, because I still had my emergency backup. I started mapping signal coverage. I contacted a landowner who owed me a favor, and within 24 hours, I had leased a sliver of hilltop terrain just outside HOA jurisdiction. I didn't need a lot of space, just enough for a few 35-foot masts and a mobile base station. I filed out federal filings under Emergency Communications Operations, flagged the project under Infrastructure Enhancement Protocols, and submitted a notice of wireless facility activation. It was legal, protected, and fully within my rights. The next day, a contractor arrived to install an unassuming concrete foundation. Karen showed up halfway through, demanding to see permits. I handed her a folder 3 inches thick. She flipped through the first page, turned red, and tossed it back with a sneer. "Satellite dishes now," she snapped. "This isn't a war zone." "Not yet," I said coolly, "but you're working on it." I didn't build a simple signal tower. I built a system, mesh repeaters, directional antennas, and a smart access filter that allowed me to control access by address. The Wi-Fi was fast, reliable, free. It stretched for miles, covering every neighborhood around us, every school and park, and even the local fire station. But not the HOA. Not a single byte passed through to their block. I blacklisted every house in the directory. My system could bypass VPN masking and IP switching. If you lived in Karen's domain, you were surfing the dark ages. Meanwhile, neighbors outside the HOA started hearing about the mystery Wi-Fi that didn't drop, didn't throttle, and didn't charge a dime. I anonymously named the network Free to All Except Karen and let the memes write themselves. But I wasn't doing this for laughs. I was setting the tone. Karen had snipped my connection, thinking she could sever my access to the world, but what she really did was give me a reason to build something bigger than revenge. I was giving power back to the people, one signal bar at a time. And Karen? She was about to learn what it felt like to get ghosted by the entire digital world. The thing about building something revolutionary in plain sight is that most people won't recognize it until it's already changing their life. For the next few days, I worked quietly, avoiding drama, letting the neighborhood gossip swirl around what I was doing up on the hill. The base foundation for the main mast was poured, the solar array was mounted, and the first antenna tower rose like a steel skeleton against the sky. A local crew helped erect it under my supervision, and even they didn't fully understand the scale of what I was putting together. To them, it looked like just another wireless relay. To me, it was the backbone of a hyperlocal mesh network with targeted filters and smart routing. I had built systems like this in post-hurricane zones where cellular and broadband were down for weeks. This wasn't just a Wi-Fi project. It was infrastructure warfare. Karen naturally came sniffing around again. She drove up in her beige SUV, parked way too close to the work zone, and stormed over with her clipboard and an expression that suggested she thought frowning could stop progress. She demanded to see new permits, zoning clearance, noise evaluations, tower height limits. I handed her a binder containing copies of everything: city permit approvals, FAA compliance for the tower height, RF safety inspection report. She flipped through a few pages and immediately accused me of fraud. "This is a residential area. You can't just build commercial towers," she snapped. "That's the beauty of it," I said, keeping my voice calm. "It's not commercial. It's classified as emergency communications infrastructure, filed under the Telecommunications Act. I've also partnered with a local first responders group to provide backup signal if their lines go down. So unless you're arguing with FEMA and Next, you might want to step back." She stood there squinting at me, clearly not used to people who read more than her HOA bylaws. She muttered something about consulting a legal advisor, but I knew she had nothing. I wasn't just playing within the rules. I was the guy who wrote some of them. Karen stormed off, barking into her phone about lawsuits, but I knew it was empty noise. What wasn't noise was the sudden flood of neighbors from outside the HOA who started showing up near the hill, phones out, grinning as they discovered a new Wi-Fi signal labeled Freedom Net. I had configured the access gateway to allow any address not registered with the HOA's database to connect automatically. Password-free, high-speed internet poured through their devices like manna from the digital heavens. Kids streamed videos with no lag. Parents uploaded work reports in seconds, and retired couples FaceTimed their grandkids without glitches. Freedom Net became the neighborhood's best-kept secret. Inside the HOA, though, things got real dark real fast. Karen sent a warning letter to all residents, accusing a certain unnamed neighbor of setting up a rogue signal that could potentially cause interference with official HOA-endorsed internet providers. That would have been funny if it wasn't so desperate. The irony was thick. She had cut my legally installed line, declared war on my bandwidth, and now she was trying to spin it like I was destabilizing her rule. What she hadn't counted on was how thoroughly she'd underestimated how tired everyone was of the constant fines for minor violations, the over-policing of lawn decor, the surveillance-style patrols on golf carts. They were all starting to pile up. I heard whispers of neighbors considering a petition. Some even asked me directly if I would run for the HOA board. I laughed it off at the time. I wasn't interested in their politics. I was just here to make sure no one got to play dictator over something as basic as internet access. But Karen wasn't done yet. I spotted two unfamiliar men wandering near the tower's base one afternoon, pretending to be utility inspectors. I approached casually, hands in my pockets, and asked who sent them. They mumbled something about a noise complaint. When I asked for ID, one of them showed me a laminated card that looked like it had been printed on a home computer. I asked if they were there on behalf of the city. They left without answering. Later that night, security footage caught Karen walking the same path, snapping photos of the tower and my solar array. She was clearly fishing for anything she could use to report me. I decided to double down. I filed additional paperwork to formally designate the site as a registered auxiliary emergency node in partnership with a volunteer disaster response group. I sent copies of the declaration to the city, the county, and for good measure, my congressional rep. I wasn't just playing defense. I was locking the castle doors. A few nights later, I watched the neighborhood map light up from my laptop. Green dots show devices connecting to the network, pinning back with solid bandwidth. Every green dot was a household enjoying the freedom Karen had tried to destroy. And in the middle of the map, like a black hole sucking in digital joy, sat a dead zone, the HOA neighborhood, unable to connect, signal dampened, addresses filtered, access denied. Word spread. People outside the HOA began to notice just how powerful a neighborhood-based internet system could be. No ASP billing nightmares, no data throttling, no random outages blamed on maintenance. I kept it fast, I kept it free, and I kept it Karen-proof. Then came the city council meeting. Karen showed up with a binder full of accusations, claiming I was operating a commercial enterprise, violating residential codes, endangering wildlife, and causing emotional distress through tech-based bullying. I showed up with two laptops, one showing the tower's legal status, the other displaying real-time speed tests from nearby neighborhoods. I walked the council through every permit, every FCC regulation, and then played a short clip, security footage of Karen, under cover of night, trying to dismantle my repeater node with a wrench. There were gasps. One council member asked if I intended to press charges. I said I was considering all legal options. Karen turned beet red and tried to spin it as a misunderstanding, claiming she thought it was abandoned equipment. That lie fell apart when I played a second video, her clearly saying, "Let's rip this junk out before he gets more attention." The council ruled in my favor unanimously. After the meeting, two other residents quietly pulled me aside and said, "We're starting the petition to remove Karen. You have our support." I didn't smile, not right away. I just nodded, knowing full well the signal had only just started to spread, and the real blackout was just beginning for her. The funny thing about power is that the moment someone like Karen feels it slipping, they don't get more reasonable. They get more dangerous. I should have known the next move wouldn't be another condescending letter or some petty HOA violation slip stuck in my mailbox. No, this time Karen wanted to escalate, and sure enough, she did it the only way she knew how: sabotage. It started with a beep from my security alert system in the middle of the night. My cameras had picked up motion near the perimeter of the hilltop tower, and I groggily checked my phone to see two silhouettes creeping along the fence line. I watched, half awake, as one pulled out a bolt cutter and started testing the locks on the gate. The other held a flashlight, shaking nervously, clearly not expecting the infrared cameras to catch their every move. I didn't bother calling the HOA or confronting them. I called the police. By the time the squad car arrived, the two trespassers had backed off, but not before yanking on the signal repeater and damaging one of the solar connections. I met the officers at the hilltop and reviewed the footage with them. When I zoomed in and enhanced the video, there it was, Karen in her unmistakable beige trench coat and ridiculous matching sun visor, smirking as she whispered something to one of the men. She didn't even wear a mask. That's how confident she was that she could get away with it. The cops were surprisingly cooperative, especially after I explained the repeater was part of a federally supported emergency node. Tampering with it wasn't just vandalism. It was a criminal act with real consequences. The officers took the footage, opened an investigation, and advised me to press charges. I agreed, and just like that, the first domino tipped. Karen had stepped out of the realm of HOA power plays and into criminal territory. I didn't stop there. I contacted my attorney and initiated a civil lawsuit for malicious interference, loss of business, and attempted destruction of federal infrastructure. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about creating a legal record that Karen couldn't squirm out of with fake apologies or baked goods at the next community potluck. She was now dealing with real courts, real penalties, and real exposure. Within a week, she was served papers, and her smug smile vanished like signal in a dead zone. But she still had one last trick to play. The HOA, desperate to save face, called an emergency board meeting. Karen pushed a vote to formally file a cease and desist order against my tower, citing community safety concerns and unlicensed radiation levels. I showed up to the meeting with a stack of printed FCC compliance reports, radiation safety certificates, and even a glowing letter from the local fire chief who was using my tower as a backup signal node. The meeting turned into a circus. Karen stood at the front of the room, ranting about how the tower was giving her headaches, how her plants had stopped growing, and how she believed her cat was losing fur because of my illegal frequencies. Someone in the crowd muttered, "It's a Siamese Karen. They're supposed to look like that," and the entire room burst into laughter. Her grip was slipping. When I was finally allowed to speak, I laid it all out. The sabotage, the footage, the legal filings, the permits. I reminded them that not only was my system legal in helping others, it was only restricted in this HOA because Karen had made it personal. I had the ability to grant access to everyone in that room instantly. All they had to do was vote her out and reverse her petty blacklisting order. That night, the board didn't vote on my tower. They voted to hold a recall election. Karen's mask cracked the moment she realized the very rules she clung to for years could be used against her. She had spent so much time weaponizing the HOA bylaws that she forgot one key thing. Those bylaws could also be used to remove her. The petition started circulating that same night. At first, it was whispers. Then it was signatures. Then it was door-to-door campaigning. By the end of the week, more than 70% of the residents had signed in favor of the recall. They were tired of the fines, the fear, the silence. My tower had just been the spark. Meanwhile, my signal continued to grow stronger. With the replacement repeater installed, I extended the range further, and soon businesses outside the HOA started asking if they could link into the mesh. I gave them temporary access codes. Local cafes, a small library, even a food pantry started benefiting from what Karen had tried to destroy. The irony? Her own house still couldn't connect. The blackout stayed until the community decided otherwise. But even as the tower flourished and Karen's support eroded, I kept one eye on her. Because people like her don't give up, they plot. One morning, I got a letter from her lawyer claiming defamation. According to her, my actions had caused emotional anguish, public humiliation, and mental trauma. She was demanding I issue a public apology and pay damages for what she called targeted technological harassment. I responded by uploading the original security footage of her attempted sabotage, with timestamps and audio included, to a public Dropbox link. I then shared that link with the entire HOA mailing list. The subject line of the email: "Truth always has full signal." The next day, the lawsuit was withdrawn. No apology, no payout, just silence. What Karen didn't understand was that she had picked a fight in a world she didn't understand. In her world, power came from rules and intimidation. In mine, power came from knowledge, logic, and the quiet satisfaction of watching a tyrant buffer endlessly while the rest of the world streamed on without her. And while she scrambled to hold on to her crumbling empire, I wasn't done. Not even close. because the real punishment hadn't started yet. That was coming soon, in the form of a community she no longer controlled, a vote she couldn't manipulate, and a signal she couldn't block. The countdown to recall was on, and the best part, the final upload was going to be in 4K live. The neighborhood felt different. You could feel it in the way people looked each other in the eye again, the way neighbors actually talked on the sidewalks instead of pretending not to see one another. The fear that used to hang over every blade of overgrown grass, every off-color porch light, every unapproved garden gnome, it was fading. Karen's power had always depended on silence and isolation, but once I lit the signal towers and let people talk, really talk, it was like they realized the bars of their cage were made of paper. The recall vote was only a few days away, and the buzz wasn't just digital anymore. People who'd never cared about HOA meetings were suddenly printing flyers, knocking on doors, and wearing t-shirts that said "Full Bars for All," with a tiny Wi-Fi icon that looked suspiciously like my tower. The momentum had become a movement. I stayed out of the limelight, not because I was shy, but because this wasn't about me. This was about every neighbor Karen had harassed into compliance, every ridiculous fine she had mailed, every threat she made behind closed doors. I wanted the vote to be about her pattern, not my revenge. So while others canvassed and rallied, I stayed focused on the tech. I upgraded the backup battery system, increased the mesh node density for even stronger coverage, and quietly started preparing a community portal that would give local families free access to job postings, school resources, and emergency alerts. Still, I knew Karen wouldn't go down quietly. 2 days before the vote, a bizarre incident happened. The HOA bulletin board near the community entrance was vandalized. Flyers promoting the recall had been torn down and replaced with anonymous papers warning residents that outside forces were trying to destroy the sanctity of neighborhood living. One flyer read, "Don't let tech bullies and keyboard warriors turn our home into a Wi-Fi wasteland." It was laughable, but it also showed Karen was getting desperate. She had no real counter-argument, only fear-mongering and outdated slogans. And then came the night of the recall. The community center was packed. People who hadn't attended a single meeting in years now stood shoulder to shoulder, some wearing buttons that read, "Unkaren Our Community." I stood in the back corner, arms folded, quietly observing. Karen entered, flanked by her 2 remaining loyal board members, dressed like she was about to host a gala. Her expression was a cross between arrogance and panic, the look of someone who knows the odds aren't in her favor but still clings to hope like it's a lifeboat. The vote took place by secret ballot. No speeches, no shouting matches, no dramatic outbursts, just quiet determination. Residents filed in, marked their boxes, and dropped their vote. I watched them come and go, some with relief, some with cautious hope. When the ballots were counted, the results were read aloud by a third-party moderator hired specifically to prevent any claims of bias. It wasn't close. Karen was recalled with 78% voting in favor of removal. Her 2 loyalists were voted out with similar margins. A cheer erupted across the room, not wild or celebratory, but cathartic, a long exhale after years of holding breath. Karen didn't speak. She just stood there frozen, as if she couldn't comprehend what had happened. Her little empire had crumbled in less than 10 minutes of counting. What came next was even more poetic. The newly elected board, composed of a retired teacher, a Gulf War veteran, and a local software engineer, wasted no time. On their very first vote, they passed a motion to lift the digital blackout that Karen had enforced on the community. They requested full access to the Freedom Net network and even proposed a collaboration to create a resident-run tech advisory committee. I nodded, gave them access codes, and within seconds, a signal that had been blocked for nearly 2 months lit up across the HOA neighborhood like fireworks. Phones buzzed, tablets pinged, and someone yelled, "We're online," followed by laughter and applause. It wasn't just internet. It was a symbol. The blackout was over, and the community had taken control. The following day, something remarkable happened. I received an anonymous envelope on my doorstep. Inside was a hand-drawn card from a child named Mia who lived 2 streets over. It had crayon-colored bars rising in a curve, a smiley face, and the words, "Thank you for the Wi-Fi. My dad got a new job because of you." It hit me harder than I expected. All the tech, all the legal fights, all the headaches, they were worth it for that moment alone. Meanwhile, Karen's silence was deafening. She didn't show her face for days. Rumors swirled that she was trying to sell her house. Others said she was drafting a public apology. But most people didn't care. They had moved on. The narrative was no longer about Karen. It was about what came next. With the new board's blessing, I launched the community portal. Parents could now access school forms and tutoring resources. Seniors could schedule ride shares to doctor appointments. Teenagers could apply for local internships. I even set up a channel for emergency weather alerts, coordinated with the fire department, to use the tower for push notifications during wildfires. The network wasn't just signal. It was connection. The tower became a symbol of resistance, not just against Karen, but against all the small, petty tyrannies people accept because they feel powerless. I didn't need revenge. I had results, and the community had a new voice, one that didn't need a microphone or a meeting room, just a strong enough signal and a willingness to stand up when it mattered. One evening, I walked up the hill just before sunset. The sky was turning gold, and the tower stood silhouetted like a lighthouse. I took a small wooden sign from my backpack, one I'd been working on for weeks. I hammered it into the ground at the base of the mast, right where Karen had once stood barking threats at me. The sign read, "Strong signal, stronger people." I stood there for a while, listening to the quiet hum of rooters and the gentle rustle of wind in the trees. Somewhere below, kids were laughing. Someone was watching a movie, and someone else was probably FaceTiming their grandma. And Karen, she was finally silent. Not because I muted her, but because no one was listening anymore. The storm didn't come the way I expected it would. No dramatic lawsuit. No final confrontation in front of the HOA. No screaming match in a driveway. It came quietly, wrapped in embarrassment, and wrapped even tighter in public humiliation. The week after the vote, Karen reemerged, not as the neighborhood tyrant with her clipboard and blazer, but as a shell of her former self. Sunglasses on, hoodie pulled low, walking her little Pomeranian as if anonymity were still an option. But anonymity had vanished. The internet has a long memory, and the footage of her trying to dismantle my repeater with a wrench had gone viral. The video hit 1 million views in 3 days after it was posted on a local subreddit titled Karen vs. The Signal. Memes erupted almost instantly. Her face, frozen in furious mid-swing, became a punchline. People dubbed her Buffering Karen, and every time someone had a tech issue, they joked she was nearby cutting the line. At first, I felt a flicker of guilt, not because she didn't deserve the consequences, she absolutely did, but because she was unraveling so quickly it wasn't even satisfying. But then she went on a local radio station and doubled down. She claimed I had launched a personal vendetta to brainwash the neighborhood and compared my tower to a psychological warfare weapon. She said the tower was making people forget about tradition, that it was turning them into screen-addicted anarchists. The host didn't even bother hiding his laughter. He asked if she believed the internet was a government conspiracy. She paused. "I'm not saying that, but I'm not saying it either." And with that, the last of her credibility evaporated. Meanwhile, the tower was doing more than just providing signal. It was creating opportunities. I worked with a few residents to launch a community podcast. We called it Signal Strength. We interviewed local veterans, teachers, small business owners, even the kid who ran a lemonade stand turned online candy shop with the help of a free tutorial he watched on the network. The first episode opened with a clip of Karen yelling about radiation levels. We didn't name her. We didn't have to. Everyone knew. The point wasn't to mock her. It was to show that even in a neighborhood where fear once ruled, we could build something better, something based on connection instead of control. Then something unexpected happened. A journalist from a national tech magazine reached out. They wanted to do a piece on grassroots internet solutions and how communities could liberate themselves from both overpriced SPs and tyrannical HOAs. I agreed to meet, and we talked for hours. I showed them the system, explained the design, and shared how it started, not as some big idea to save the world, but just as a response to one petty act of sabotage. The article ran with the title, "How One Man Beat an HOA and Gave a Neighborhood the Internet It Deserved." It got traction, big traction. Suddenly, my inbox was flooded with messages from people across the country asking for help setting up their own towers. I couldn't answer them all, but I did start documenting the process, posting tutorials, templates, open source guides, and then, of course, the producers came knocking. A major streaming platform wanted to do a short docuseries about the story. They pitched it as a real-life David versus Goliath, but with rooters and HOA pettiness. I told them I'd only agree if the focus was on the community, not just me and Karen. They said yes, and before long, cameras were rolling. It felt surreal, watching a crew set up lighting in my backyard, where just months ago I was digging cable trenches in frustration. They even interviewed the fire chief who now used our signal for emergency coordination. They interviewed Mia, the little girl who'd drawn me the thank you card. They interviewed the teacher who'd used the new internet to host virtual tutoring during bad weather. They didn't need to exaggerate anything. The real story was strong enough. The last episode ended with the entire neighborhood gathering at the Hill for a small community celebration. We grilled burgers, played music, and set up a big projector screen to live stream the event. The signal from the tower carried everything. No buffering, no interruptions. Someone even brought a drone to capture aerial shots of the crowd, and when it panned out, you could see the tower standing tall in the middle of everything, a beacon of change and resilience. That night, I stood near the base of the tower, where the wooden signs still read, "Strong signal, stronger people." Someone had added a little plaque underneath it that said, "Formerly known as Dead Zone." I laughed when I saw it. It was the kind of quiet humor this place had been missing for years. As the sun dipped behind the hills, Karen showed up alone. No entourage, no clipboard, just her and her tiny dog. She walked slowly, staying at the edge of the gathering, watching people laugh and dance and talk like they'd forgotten she ever ruled here. I caught her eye from across the space, but she didn't approach. She just stood there, blinking up at the tower, and then turned around and walked away. It was the first time I saw her without a scowl, just tired, like she knew the era was over. Weeks passed. The community portal became a full-on hub with job boards, school updates, and even a tech help section where teenagers offered tutorials to seniors trying to navigate their tablets. The board meetings became boring again, in the best possible way. No shouting, just decisions made based on what actually helped people. And the best part, the signal stayed strong. We kept improving it, expanding it, protecting it, not because we were afraid of another Karen, but because we knew what it meant to have something worth defending. I never dismantled the blacklisting system. I kept it there, not out of spite, but as a reminder of what happens when power is abused. I even renamed the firewall protocol Karen Lockout. It stayed in the code, tucked into the heart of the system, forever guarding against the day someone might forget what came before the signal. Because this wasn't just about Wi-Fi, it was about freedom. And once you give people that kind of connection, real connection, no one ever wants to go back to buffering.